One of the true blessings of God's way of life is the education, understanding, and personal application of God's model of family. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, and I thought it would be a good, maybe a side road to talk about before we enter the Fall Holy Day, Feast of Tabernacles, last great day. We all leave town, most of us leave town with our families and gather as a spiritual family. One of the things that always happened to Tina and I when we were raising kids is you'd never get a chance to get away together as a couple. It seems like you always plan, but with 4 kids running around the house and breakneck schedule, especially when they all get into sports and they're all playing on different teams, the necessity for time together as a husband and wife is certainly there, but the time seems to escape you. And so every year we get into this routine of looking forward to the feast to spend time together, right? And so it's so important for couples and families to, God's kind of built into this system a way for us to come together as a family when we keep His holy days and do it in a proper way. And so I thought I would take this small side road, although it's very applicable to what we have ahead of us. All of us, no matter if we're married or not, are introduced to the familial relationships, the way God has intended they be structured. These fundamental principles that govern our human family structure are really meant to be practiced and honed by us today for future use in the spiritual family of God. And we're going to hear a lot about that at the feast. Many in the millennium and billions in the second resurrection will have to learn to do the same, to practice these godly principles inside the family structure to realize the benefit that God built in that system. Many of us in this room have been married for a number of years, but even if you're not currently married and you're single, a lot of these principles obviously very much apply inside the spiritual family as well. So, I think about it in this way. All of us own our own vehicles, and we know that if we want those vehicles to run, when we go out there in the morning and we're in a hurry to get to work and start the car and it won't start, if we want those vehicles to run, we got to do some regular maintenance. And how many times, I can't count how many times I'm driving down the road and hear a noise that you're not used to hearing. And all of a sudden, it just diverts your attention. I haven't heard that noise before. And so now all the way to work or the store or wherever you're going, you hear that noise and it's just bugging you. You have to find out what that is. It's not normal, right? We know our automobiles so well, all the little squeaks and grunts and groans that they have, but when there's a noise that happens that we don't recognize, we certainly, it's a little troubling. So we have this heightened sense of awareness about the things we use to get jobs done, but I think we also have a heightened sense of awareness about our relationships inside our family and in our marriages and even in the church. So it's, you can think about this message maybe as just an oil change, a maintenance, spiritual tune-up, if you will. So today I thought I'd just simply walk through some of the steps I take when I'm counseling a couple for marriage, in hopes it gives us some personal cause to maybe fine-tune our own marriage, especially, like I said, as we come into the Fall Holy Day season and what God's focused on as family and relationships. And again, for those that aren't married, there's a plethora of physical and spiritual analogies to be had as well. One of the tried and true workbooks has been Before You Say I Do. I don't know if any of you had a chance to in marriage counseling in years past. This is an old book. It's been reprinted a number of times, but a very old book, been used by many of the ministers in the church over the years. Not exclusively. You find that when you go through it, it does have a few holes, so you try to fill it with other means, but it's been a tried and true book. One of the questions that couples that are counseling for marriage will get asked is, do you believe marriage is a contract? Do you believe marriage is a contract? Why or why not? We try to ask that fairly soon out of the gate, because if we go too far in, the answers get revealed. So try to ask those questions right away. It's interesting to hear people's response. We ask, again, these questions because we want to be certain that the couple is going into this framed by the right mindset and context. No one should ever, enter a personal binding agreement without completely understanding what they're agreeing to. And so we try to ask this right out of the gate. The other reason we go over this material early is because the couple's standing up in front of their family and friends, and their hands are fairly clammy, if you remember back to your wedding, and shaking at times, and their minds are clouded with all the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings of the day. And we know the couple's probably not hearing anything said by the minister. And I'll pick on Aunt Derek a little bit because that was very much him on his wedding day here a month or so ago. I could tell. I've spent years raising him. I could tell by the look in his eye that there was nobody home. And quite the opposite with his lovely bride, who was very clued in and was hearing every word. And so it was just interesting. So we try to go over these things ahead of time so that we can think about them and unpack them and understand them. Because when things are flying on the day, you need to know, what you've agreed to and the course you're taking. It was an honor, again, to be able to attend and be a part of Derek and Autumn's wedding. It was an honor to attend Noah and Sonia's wedding. Not Carlson. Boyd, thank you. I thought both of those weddings went really well and were very enjoyable. A little bit too much heat on the Boyd's wedding, but it didn't seem to dampen the spirits. It's no small feat to pull off a wedding in general, and certainly most of us that have been through maybe our wedding, but also multiple weddings, helping other people out, we know that what a challenge it is. So when we ask a couple at the beginning of their counseling, do you believe the marriage is a contract? Why or why not? I'm very curious as to their answers. As part of the counseling, we'll go over it with them ahead of time in detail, what will be said by the minister during the ceremony, and verifying they agree to the terms of the contract they're entering. And so on the day when all they hear is blah, 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 they know exactly when to say I do, and we can move on. We say, do you covenant with God in the presence of these witnesses to take, and then the names. And the wording's important because the two most powerful contracts we will make in our entire lives will be, first of all, baptism for eternity, and secondly, marriage for the duration of our physical life. All other contracts are between you and someone else. This contract is not just between the two of you. There's a reasonable amount of people who understand it is a contract, but they believe it is between the bride and groom exclusively. It isn't. It's do you, Billy, contract with Susie? Do you, Susie, contract with Billy? It's do you both contract with God in the presence of these witnesses? And so it's an important principle to understand who you're entering the contract, who you're entering into the contract with. So many in attendance then become a part of that contract. In the presence of these witnesses makes those that attend a part of that contractual agreement. And, I've heard many weddings, more modern weddings, that the couples have actually asked the one performing the wedding to make that point to the congregation that they are there to witness and that they have a responsibility to the couple to hold them accountable for the contract that they've made. And so I thought that's an interesting part of the ceremonies that I've seen a few recently. So this is our beginning point and a look at the foundation of marriage. Then the counseling moves along. Marriage is a relationship between a man and a woman intended by God to be a monogamous relationship. Marriage is intended to be a permanent bond by which many human and relational needs are satisfied. The need to love and be loved, the need for deep friendship, the need for sharing and companionship, for sexual satisfaction, for children, the need to escape loneliness. Marriage ought to be a bond of love, reflecting the love Christ has for his people. A bond of sacrificial love, where a husband and a wife have become one flesh, a union, unity. So that's part of what will be read during that ceremony. I know it's the first time Derek's heard it. So just wanted to give you a rewind of what was read. So what was the first observation that God made of Adam and his state? What was the last thing Adam did before God made Eve? Well, he named all the animals. How did they come before him? In twos. So what did God say to Adam right before he brought all the animals before him to name? God was going to teach Adam something through his creation. Remember, God makes this statement many times in Scripture, you know me by the things that are made. And so God very early in Genesis 2 and verse 18 used that to teach Adam. And the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. So here's Adam naming all the animals that are coming by, God allowing him to do that, and Adam noticing, wait a minute, how come I don't have a mate? And so God, that was an accident. That wasn't an accident. God doing this to try to teach Adam that there was an order to things. So a teaching moment for Adam. Then God causes Adam to sleep, creates Eve from Adam by using one of Adam's ribs. And when Adam awakes, we're not given much narrative, unfortunately. Would have loved to see a playback on how all that happened. But Adam calls Eve woman because she was taken from man. But then before Genesis 2 is finished, we're given a second piece of foundational information. So who is told to leave? In Genesis 2:24, it says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So who is God instructing here? At that time when society was tribal, a young man didn't leave the family normally. In fact, quite the contrary. It was not only expected but for the survival of the family and the sustaining of generational inheritance, if you will, having sons to pass along the land and with it the responsibilities of family leadership required the men, more specifically the oldest son, to stay and learn as much as he could learn from the father. It was not uncommon for a dad and mom, when they got to the age where they could no longer handle the physical rigors of running a farm or a ranch or doing those kinds of strenuous physical tasks, that they would move to a smaller home on the property, and the oldest son would then, and his family would then take a more prominent role in leading the family. And so they would move to the main home and take over that responsibility. So when God through Moses says in verse 24, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, it's not really addressing geography or distance, but the leave and cleave part is addressing the frame of mind. It's speaking to the becoming one flesh and becoming one unit. Little story, when Tina and I were dating to be married, she left Northern California to move up to Portland. She left at age 19, at the end of her 19th year, to move up to Portland. And she took a bit of a risk on a young man who, believe me, was probably not really worth the risk at that time. God was still very much working on me. She traded everything she knew, all her friends, physical security, comfort, to move up to Portland and take a chance on me, on us. I didn't properly value that then. I think most of us men would probably look back at those days in our life and think, yeah, I probably didn't place as much value on what that decision took for our women. But I do value it now, and I see the value in it now. You know, many people that I call my friends at that time privately told her while she lived up here, oh, you're going to have trouble with Rob. He's very reliant on his mother. You're going to become his mother. And she got all sorts of advice about that. Thank you, friends, for doing that. Appreciate that. I was 24 years old. I did still live at home. Mom still did my laundry. I did pay rent, but I think that was more Dad's doing than Mom's doing. I think Mom would allow me to skate. Dad did not. But I had it pretty good. I had it pretty good at home. And I loved living at home. It was a safe place for me. So my friends viewed that as troubles on the horizon, because he's used to have everything done for him. And so certainly there were some red flags, but after we were married and we moved into our first apartment, I think I adapted fairly well. I mean, I'm giving myself a decent grade there. You might talk to Tina and she might have a different grade, but I thought we did fairly well. Much of what she was warned about with me probably didn't really materialize. I guess the ultimate authority again would be Tina on that. It did materialize in one way, and it became a source of consternation and contention. Mom's whole world was about her baby boy. I was the baby of 3, and having me move out of the house meant they were empty nesters, and Mom had a hard time with that. And so she would call on Friday evenings and talk to Tina and say, what are you fixing him for dinner? I'm sure none of you have dealt with that in your families. It took me, I don't know, maybe 5 years to fix that. Too long to fix that. Leave and cleave. That's what that's talking about. Leave and cleave. Become one unit. And it took me quite a while, much too long, to address that with mom. How do you address that with mom? Well, it's not easy. But I found a way. The instruction from God is to the husband to leave dad and mom and cleave to your wife. Become one with her. Form your own household and family, and all that that entails. That means listening to your wife and making sure she's comfortable and at a home, in your relationship, that it's a place that she can thrive and that she feels free to be herself and to grow and mature. The greatest violation of leave and cleave, in my mind, is when the couple comes to an impasse in some area and they seek the reinforcement of their parents to buttress their position. Seek an outside source to prop your position up. It's not leaving and cleaving. The I'm right and you're wrong and I'm going to bring in support to prove it is a path to destruction, to a relationship. Again, leave and cleave is not as much a geographical move, but an emotional and a functional relocation of allegiances, responsibilities, obligations, and a personal and intimate contract, agreement. Sometimes putting some distance between mom and dad can aid the bonding process. It did for us. After we were married, I think for 2 years, we moved down to Eugene from the Portland area. Not very far away, 3 hours, but just far enough for about 4 years for us to begin to know what it's like to be on our own. And so sometimes a little distance can help that. It certainly did for us. I realize today I'm speaking to probably more grandparent age than I am to young couples, and the responsibility to adhere to this principle as taught by God really does apply to us all. So for those of us who've been married for 30, 40, 50 years, are we still leaving and cleaving? Is there anything that is involved in our lives today that get in the way of that? Have we allowed those things to sneak into our relationships? Again, pointed towards the fall holy days and what God's focus is on family. It's good to get an oil change. It's a good time to have those discussions because this is what God's focused on. The challenge for us as parents who have invested an endless supply of everything we have and are into our children, young lady and young man, it's hard for us to just turn that off. How many of us have kind of had a tether on our kids a little bit? And those things are very difficult logistically, functionally, in an agrarian society that Moses, the author here, was addressing in Genesis. This was most likely an even more difficult challenge. If you as the patriarch and matriarch decide, okay, I can't physically keep up on all of the property and tend to the family, it's time for us to take a step back and you move to what we would call today a mother-in-law's quarters, and the eldest son and family moves into the house. How difficult do you think it was for those families to not meddle? Because how many of our sons and daughters say to us, well, I wouldn't do things that way. I would do things differently. And how easy was it for those families to function in that kind of change? It's a challenge for all of us in that regard. But the instruction stands on its own, and the value of this new contract covenant with God must be recognized by all and treated with the proper respect. Two people need to walk through the challenges of life together, relying on the contract they made with their God to navigate together the twists and turns of their life. One of the most important concepts any couple needs to understand is love and the role it plays in marriage. This is a huge topic. It deserves a lifetime of attention and pursuit, which most of you have given it. So we won't spend a lot of time on this point other than to say when you talk about love to a couple counseling for marriage, it can carry with it a host of different meanings than it would for most of us in this room because of tenure and time. A couple's understanding of love and how it is woven into the fabric of their relationship is understandably different than an older couple would be. Maybe a little higher on the emotional scale as they're younger, and a little lower on the emotional scale if you're older, and more on the practical and more on the doing side, right? As a counselor to couples pursuing marriage, the main thing we focus on is understanding that love is something that you do. It's a decision you make, supported by actions you take. Now we have to cover that, because I said the younger you are, the more emotion is involved. And that's a good thing. But we also have to lay that groundwork. So love is a verb, it's not a noun, it's an action, not a place to be. When we look at those who have been married 50, 60 years or more, the love they have practiced over time reveals a long, comprehensive list of decisions made that have woven them together in such a tight-knit bond, and in a relationship where there's peace and a working peace and calmness, a real sense of calmness about their life together and their relationship at home. I remember a song sung by Clint Black, an accomplished Western music artist. The song was written by him and Donald Ewing. It's called Something That We Do. I don't know whether you have heard that before. Yeah, I'll read a few of the lyrics, or read the lyrics here, and you'll probably, if you have heard it, the music will kind of come into your head right behind them. I would play it for you, but today everybody's nitpicky about copywriting, so we'd get ourselves in trouble. But let me read part of it. It says, I remember when the day we wed, I can see that picture in my head. I still believe the words we said forever will ring true. Love is certain, love is kind, love is yours, and love is mine. But it isn't something that we find, it's something that we do. It's holding tight, letting go. It's flying high and laying low. Let your strongest feelings show, and your weaknesses too. It's a little and a lot to ask, an endless and a welcome task. Love isn't something that we have, it's something that we do. We help to make each other all that we can be, though we can find our strength and inspiration independently. The way we work together is what sets our love apart, so closely that you can't tell where I end and where you start. It gives me heart remembering how we started with a simple vow. There's so much to look back on now. Still it feels brand new. We're on a road that has no end, and each day we begin again. Love's not just something that we're in, it's something that we do. We help to make each other all that we can be, though we can find our strength and inspiration independently. The way we work together is what sets our love apart, so closely that you can't tell where I end and where you start. Love is wide, love is long, Love is deep, and love is strong. Love is why I love this song, and I hope you love it too. I remember well the day we wed. I can see that picture in my head. Love isn't just those words we said. It's something that we do. There's no request too big or small. We give ourselves, we give our all. Love isn't some place that we fall. It's something that we do. You know, it's a simple song. I don't know how many of you heard the tune behind it, but it's packed with meaning concerning the point that love is a decision that we make, and that decision leads to positive, supportive action. We're called out of this world by God, whose very nature is described to us as love. We should understand this more completely than the rest of the world, and that understanding should be coming from the relationships that He's provided us, not just in our marital relationships, but in our relationships here in the body of Christ. So one of the things we ask a couple to do also is list 3 of the most important scriptures upon which you would like to base your marriage. Now, we typically tell them they have to be more creative than going to the standbys. So we cover the standbys, and we take those out of play. So we turn to Ephesians 5, Paul's collection of relational instructions. Now, Paul's instruction here we're pretty familiar with. I won't read them all because we're pretty aware of them, but for me as a husband, Paul gives me a pretty high standard. Ephesians 5 and verse 25 through 30, and these are very familiar scriptures to us. It says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones." You know, Paul's words take us back to what we referred to in Genesis 2. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. We've been made from Christ, and he cares for us with that same care he would give himself. You know, as husbands, measuring ourselves against Christ in our love towards our wives, that's a tall order. Christ gives us a pretty high measuring stick. And he does it openly. Like, the women can read these verses too. And they know that we're measured against that. So laying down our lives takes on much more meaning than being willing to step in front of a bus for them. Or, maybe not eating when there's not much food. It's a little more than that. But willing to live for them each and every day. To be a part of everything that they need. And to not just thrive physically, but thrive spiritually as well. Being attentive to the needs. There's a spiritual accountability to the job God gave husbands, just as Christ is fulfilling that role for the church. And so there is a myriad of analogies and examples that you can pull from Scripture as a husband and say, am I doing what Christ is doing in this particular situation? How does that translate to me in my relationship with my wife, with my family. So God provides quite a measuring stick for us. 1 Peter 3, Peter's equally excellent collection of marital instructions concerning the roles of God, the roles God actually expects us to fill. And again, we're taking these off the table when we've asked the question, find 3 scriptures to base your marriage on. Well, we're removing the easy ones, right? Those that are easy to find. Instruction in verses 1 through 6 in 1 Peter 3, he instructs women to concentrate on adorning themselves inwardly, accepting of their calling as wives, and working on beautifying their heart and their gentle spirit, using the gifts of chaste and disciplined conduct to add to her important part in the marriage. And then in verse 7, husbands are reminded that they are heirs together, and that there is a godly expectation that we learn to understand and honor their role. And with the kicker that your prayers as husbands might not be heard by God if you don't do these things. So we certainly don't want our prayers hindered, especially if we're praying for our family and the welfare of our family. We want those prayers to be heard. That's part of our job. And so it's very important. And he adds, again, some accountability to that. I've found my prayers have been much more effective when they've been outward and not inward. It's very easy for us, I think, when we kneel down to pray, to think about all the things that we're dealing with and all the things that we need to be able to get down the road the next day. But I've also found over time that the more I pray about others, especially those in my family, and for their needs, my life gets a whole lot easier, because God walks alongside of you and helps you in performing your duties. The other common place couples go, 1 Corinthians 13, it's a good place to study and compare oneself to what attributes God says love represents. So if we make all these verses off limits, Ephesians, 1 Peter 3, and we take 1 Corinthians 13 off the table, now you've given them a little bit of a task. Now they have to go find these 3 most important scriptures to build a marriage on. So again, this is maybe an oil-changing opportunity as we walk into the Feast of Tabernacles and we get some alone time together as couples. Might be a good opportunity to go back and say, what did we base our marriage on? And maybe there's 2-3 scriptures that we can agree on, that maybe this is what our marriage has been based on. Or maybe we need to tweak something to just bring a personal accountability into the relationship. Some might point to the relationship that has nothing to do with marriage directly. When we ask them to go find these scriptures, sometimes they'll find scriptures that just speak to loving commitment. So some of them we may hear back, Ruth and her relationship with her mother-in-law. So the principle behind that, Ruth 1, verses 16 and 17, I've heard this, but Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." So we've certainly got back that scripture, that passage from couples before, because it's a very strong commitment principle. In essence, this was the message Tina was giving me when she moved up at age 19. She may not have known it was that strong. because over the years that builds and that strengthens. This was a statement our daughter-in-law Caitlin was making to our son Brandon when she threw everything in her car that she owned 2 weeks after ABC graduation, which is where they met, and established a relationship. So 2 weeks after ABC graduation, Brandon flew home. She threw everything in a car that she owned and she drove out to Portland. No job, no place to stay. She just knew what she wanted. And everything else was expendable. And so you see that that kind of understanding of seeing what you want, committing to it, and being willing to sacrifice to get that. And so we say, list for us 3 scripture verses you would like to base your marriage on. And to help their minds begin to work in the right areas, we can read Matthew 7, verses 24 through 27. Christ's words here. In verse 24, therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. So we know that the Bibles in our laps are really the foundational principles that we build our lives on. And so are we building our marriages on the rock, on Christ's word, on the information that God brings to us through his Spirit? All of this is with the purpose of making sure that these 2 people who are want to enter into that kind of covenant, that they agree that the godly principles upon which a godly marriage is to be built on, and where to find that information and where it comes from. So we always try to point them back to God's Word. Next, we can ask the couple to list what you believe are 10 firm foundations or ingredients on which will go into making a solid marriage relationship. So we're branching out now, 3 foundational scriptures that we're going to base our marriage in. We're going to plant that root. Now the branches begin to grow. What are some of the ingredients that will go along to adding to a solid marriage relationship? So now if the couple is in their 20s, this may be a tough challenge to find 10 firm foundational type or ingredient type scriptures. I think the older we are, the easier it is to find these because we recognize them as really impactful elements in our relationship. But the younger, we let them off the hook a little bit. I'll give them 10, but if they can find 3 or 4 and agree upon them, then we'll take those. But for those of us that have been married 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years, might be a little easier to come up with 10. You might find yourself coming up with 50 or more, and then kind of boiling them down. So it's a good exercise to do. It'd be nice to have 10 again, but we will let them off with maybe 4 or 5, as long as they're very well thought out and agreed upon. If you're single, this still can apply to you as you think in terms of your covenant with God, your baptismal covenant with God, the foundational stones in place that you deem immovable in your relationship with God. And so very much a practical kind of way for you to solidify in your mind and heart this relationship that you have, and then tend to it in a proper way. If you're married, this is a great exercise, again, to go through in terms of those 10, foundational stones the structure of your marriage has been built on. And are they solid? Are they still solid? Do you agree with those foundational elements? And if there are a few that maybe you don't agree on, then that's the oil change. That's the time to, let's discuss these things and be open-minded and humble as you begin to build that foundation in a very real way. In the spirit of periodic, again, automobile maintenance, maybe crawling underneath the house, checking the foundation to see if something needs to be shored up. Over time, the ground settles. Many of us have houses that all of a sudden you look and the ceiling has a little bit of a crack in it, and that's because the house had settled in some area and caused a little bit of tension. It's an easy analogy. All of us have probably seen it. So it's an analogy that maybe there's something going on underneath the house that needs attention. And so think about it in those terms. How's your marriage? How's it going? Is everything running smoothly? The answer to that's probably no. Not everything runs smoothly. And so if it doesn't run smoothly, if there's a little crack, is it a foundational issue? It's worth checking out. If it's not, great. There still may be some maintenance issues to do, but if it is a foundational issue, certainly want to get to it early rather than late before it does a lot more damage to the structure. I will say as a pastor of only 3-4 years now, I can say with absolute confidence, people usually call the ministry after the house has severe cracks or there's an absolute dumpster fire. Not at the beginning, but usually when there's panic and urgency. And so we try to speak a lot to doing some preventative maintenance of your own, asking those questions inside your own families and marriages so that we don't get to a panic moment in that regard. So how long has it been since any of us have examined that foundation of our marriage and really talked about it? I'll share 3 examples. Hopefully you can come up with more. One of the most important yet challenging principles is put each other first in your life. Again, now I'm talking about this today because we have really good opportunity going forward at the feast to practice some of these things and talk about them, because you're going to be in a hotel room together for 8-9 nights. You're going to spend a lot of time together. This is an opportunity to really kind of go over these things. So first principle is put each other first in life. I say this is challenging because the landscape of life is constantly moving. And it's moving for each of you a bit differently during the day. You have your own jobs, your own responsibilities. You view things differently by the nature of who you are and how God put you together. You likely come from different family backgrounds, so you have a true center that we usually come back to in times of stress and strain, and that's usually what we grew up in or what we've been handed by our parents. All these factors and more make this really a moving target to put each other first in life. I speak to men because I are one. One of the main problems that plague men is in failed relationships, time and time again, is the woman becomes just an addition to his collection of things in life. And I've seen this a lot. Now, not in the church, fortunately, I haven't seen this a lot in the church, but it can be a mindset of us. You've seen it probably in friends and people that you know. He has his big truck, he has his motorcycle, he has his boat, and oh, by the way, he has his beautiful wife. And so that can be an issue. For men, we can easily slip into this mode without realizing it, and it's happened. And it can be a painful and uncomfortable realization when that conflict comes. Hopefully we're married to women who would voice these things, maybe give us a palm to the forehead when we start thinking about them in this way. And if we do get the palm to the forehead or the palm to the back of the head, that it might be time to stop and examine the foundational way you're thinking and reasoning. It's far too easy for us men to begin treating our wives as something less than an equal partner. And we need to remember that they are heirs together. First Peter 3:7 says, "Dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered." Again, there's the caveat that God throws in there. Your relationship with me can be hindered if you don't have the right relationship with your wife. I'm going to add some accountability on this instruction. So being able to look your spouse in the eye and say with absolute certainty that there is no one on the planet more important than you are, and to have that received with a "I know that," that's a huge benefit to your marriage. So can you have that conversation, and will you get that response? It's an important piece of your marriage. Again, the second maybe element is obviously communication. It's tied to everything we do. This is a challenging one as well, no matter how, what age we are or the length of our marriage. Satan's really busy creating ways for humanity to communicate, and yet nobody really communicates properly. It's amazing. We have a phone in our hand where we can text, we can call, we can send emails. We can communicate like nobody's business, and yet we often don't communicate properly. There's a difference between talking and communication, right? Tina and I do a lot of talking, but we find that a lot of times we don't communicate properly. So she'll say, "You never said that." "Well, yeah, I did." "No, you never said that to me." "I thought I did." So we have all these means of communication, but let's make sure that the real communication, not just talking, but communicating, is happening. Now, Tina's hearing's going a little bit, but mostly going from my monotone voice. So she has trouble hearing my monotone voice, and I mumble and talk in low tones all the time. So we have this look. So I'll say something, and across the room, she'll give me that look like, "I'm really working on the few syllables I heard, but I just can't put together what you said." And so I have to speak up and stop mumbling. Something that I've been used to doing for too many years. How many times have you been sitting in the same room? One of you is maybe watching the news, the other one is reading some email that's important, relational information, and they spend 2 or 3 minutes doing that, and then they want a response from you. There's a question. I usually get the question, but not the context. Anybody in my boat? Wait a minute, read that again? Why should I have to read it again? I just spent 2 minutes reading it. So many times we talk, but we don't communicate. And I don't think we're any different than any of you in that regard. Again, the facial expressions will tell it all. how many times we see each other, look at each other like, don't think you listened to me, or I don't think I heard that. So keep working on communication, not just talking, but where's the importance level? Mute the TV, have a conversation, communicate, finish the conversation, go back to what you were doing. Very easy concept. Again, we've got all these tools to communicate, and yet many times we don't really communicate with each other. In counseling, we'll talk about things like time. Third example is time spent together. Again, as we're approaching the feast, this is an awesome opportunity to make sure that at the feast, we're spending time together with our husband, wife, with our families. One of the items that Mrs. Luker, since we moved up to Seattle, has been poking and prodding us on a continual basis, motherly like irritating. And that is, are you spending time together? Because she knows the demands of any job can get in the way of your relationship. And so she's constantly reminding me and Tina to take time out to do things together. And she'll constantly ask me, how's it going? How are you doing on that? Don't talk to Tina and ask her the same question. I'm not doing too well, right? So these are, your investment of time is important. The point is, you can't live separate lives and have the kind of close, intimate, and enjoyable marriage you both desire. Time as a currency, think about it that way. Time as a currency, best spent on the things that are important in life. Now, we have to be realistic. You have to earn a living, right? You have to put food on the table. So because that takes 8, 9, maybe 10 hours a day, that just means it's so much more important for us to manage the time that we're not working, right? So where and how are you spending your time? The book then covers reasons for marriage. It's an interesting little exercise. A few of the positive reasons for marriage include, and they give you 5, but they expect you to come up with more. Companionship, to work together and fulfill your own and your future mate's needs, to fulfill sexual and intimate needs in a way that God intends. Love, an adequate blending of the various types of love. We're talking about eros, philia, agape. And then, because you are convinced that it is God's will for you to marry this person. And so, if God brought you together, then the relationship is definitely worth tending to and glorifying God in the work that you do. Now hopefully, these positive, reasons for marriage exist in your marriage. Again, they're just a few that they came up with. You'll have many, many more. And remember too, this, I'm talking about premarital counseling, although it does apply to our marriages that exist now. And some of the marrieds will say, oops, when they read some of those or hear some of those, you go, maybe I'm not doing that very well. And that's perfectly fine. That's kind of what this is for. There are not a basis for marriage. So they give a pretty long list of things that are not a basis for marriage. To spite or get back at your parents. Because of negative self-image, marrying your fiancé will make you feel worthwhile and will give you meaning to your life. To be a therapist or a counselor to your fiancé. Fear of being left out. being single forever, fear of independence, marrying on the rebound. You were hurt in a former relationship, and to ease your hurt, you immediately choose another. Fear of hurting the other person. So somebody's all in and you're maybe not, but you're a little fearful of hurting their feelings, you would just go ahead and get married, apparently. To escape an unhappy home. Those have happened. Those have happened. Because you are pregnant and your fiance is pregnant. Because you've had sex. I mean, there's a long list. Now maybe some of those came into play when we got married, and so those are things maybe to turn around and have a discussion about, and how you fix that, and how they're not a foundational issue of your marriage any longer. I think God is along with you, both of you, that threefold cord type relationship that you should have in your marriage with God intertwined. You can fix a lot of those things, and they can become strengths and not weaknesses. So evaluate. Another exercise the book takes you through is an evaluate your marriageability by examining the personality traits of yourself and your fiance. And they have you list 8 character traits or personality traits that you feel would help a marriage. I think that's an interesting maybe activity to go through. What traits do you feel you have at age 60, 70 that make you marriable, make you a good candidate for being in this marriage? I think they're more defined as time goes by, and certainly more recognizable, but you also may come up with a few traits that your wife or husband will go, yeah, I wouldn't put that on the list. So they're good to have conversations about. I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody, so please don't fight over these things. I'm not trying to create problems. At the end of just the first chapter of the book, it offers up 8 more traits that give a person a greater possibility of having an enriched and satisfying marriage. Adaptability. Remember Robin Weber, pastor down in Southern California, he has a saying that he just absolutely loves. He says, blessed are the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape. And it's so true and applicable to marriage and our relationships in the church. Be flexible, adaptable. If life offers one thing in spades, it would be that it's always changing. And you're always in need of being flexible and adaptable to situations. Your ability to adapt and meet the challenges together will go a long way to bringing a positive element to your marriage, a strength. The second thing it talks about is empathy. Having empathy in your marriage. Sympathy and empathy are 2 different things. We know that. The ability to really feel deep inside the needs, hurts, desires of others. That comes from experience. That comes from life lived. That comes from putting yourself out there. And the beauty of a healthy marriage relationship is that you arrive at this place of empathy much quicker because you're forced to live with someone and function with them. And so God is after building this empathy in you, and one of the best places to learn that is in a marital relationship. Third thing they mention is work through problems. You know, when a couple is harnessed correctly, we're going back to this agrarian kind of example of being harnessed in a plow together. 2 Corinthians 6 verses 14 and 15 says concerning 2 people spiritually pulling their own weight, but doing it together toward a shared cause. It's called equally yoked. The results are exponential, right? The 2 of you can carry more together than two individuals can carry on their own, separate. And if you've raised a family, you know that to be true. Absolutely. So it's a beautiful thing to see in marriages and families and congregations working together to pull and for a common goal. And there's no such thing as a marriage without problems, or a family or a congregation without problems. The ability to work through these problems is a godly trait. Fourth thing that they talk about is give and receive love. We're all different in how we express love. Some of us are very public and open with our feelings. Some are very private with our affections. None of that matters to anyone else but the person you're married to, honestly. As long as you both are on the same page here, that is what matters. And so, again, communication can come into play there, and make sure that both of you are clued in on how each other operates and likes that kind of thing, giving and receiving of love. I think all of us are probably much better at being on the giving side. We feel better about that. Sometimes just having someone love us and give us things sometimes makes us a little uncomfortable. We have to be good at both. And then it talks about similarities. Couples marry for their similarities and stay together for their differences. That's an interesting statement. We meet people because we have shared interests and we have things that we like together. But as you're married for a long period of time, you stay together because you realize that this person has strengths in areas that I am not strong in, and they make me stronger. And I have strengths that can make them stronger. So couples marry for their similarities, and they stay together for their differences. And this is, again, a beautiful thing when it works properly. Last one I'll pull out of that book is that similar family backgrounds are a reason as well. And this is a more common thing as young people grow up in the church and then marry in the church. It wasn't as common, I think, in years past. Usually you bring in two different family backgrounds all the time, and so you're meshing those. But as we have this church culture, more young people are getting married with more similar backgrounds. And again, that's removing some roadblocks early that many of us maybe had to deal with early in our marriage. So our family backgrounds and experiences become more and more similar as time goes on, and that can be helpful. For those of us that didn't have these kind of commonalities when we got married, it added some wrinkles and challenges to our relationships, and probably still does from time to time. So we just have a few more things to work on in that regard. So for those of us that have been married a while, we no doubt recognize the growth in these areas over the years. God has a way of allowing life to bring us opportunities for improvement and education for our good. The goal for us is, of course, being better at these things each and every year. But we also know things come out of left field and we can never truly prepare for. I think a lot about that when I hear about some of the prayer requests that come through, some of the health challenges that hit us sideways. And nobody's really prepared for those. And so when we look at Florida and we see these hurricanes come through and we think about the foundation and how a building is built and how to withstand that kind of storm, we compare that to our relationships. And is our foundations built to withstand some of these storms that hit us sideways, that we aren't expecting? Loss of parents, loss of mate, loss of child, loss of close friends, major mistakes or sins, errors in judgment, huge financial blunders. There's a myriad of things that can come our way. No matter the cause or outcome, a deep and meaningful marriage that has spent years in doing love can draw on its strength to battle during these times together. The beauty of a strong and godly marriage is that the character that each person has earned lives on even after death. God promises that he's building in us holy, righteous character. And I don't know about you, but nobody's better at testing that character than the person I live with. She knows me frontwards and backwards. And she is a real benefit to me building the kind of character that can last for eternity. So use the tools that God has given you to strengthen those relationships. And especially now as we face the feast ahead of us, plethora of opportunities to really spend some time with each other, whether we're married or whether we're just there with our spiritual family, to sharpen each other. This is really just a look at the first chapter of a journey in this book that's 13 chapters long that we do some premarital counseling on. My focus today was to share with you some engaging material in hopes to sparking, again, maybe a marital oil change or a tune-up to those who have been married for a while. The Feast of Tabernacles, again, is an awesome opportunity. So for those that weren't married, have some deep, meaningful conversations with close friends and with others at the feast as well about relational issues, your sisters, your brothers in the body of Christ, and take these analogies and examples we covered and learn to apply them with the intent to strengthen the bonds of friendship and brotherhood inside the body of Christ.